Joppa Harbor burned under a bruised violet sunset. The air tasted of salt and impending ruin. Jonah stood on the salt-slicked deck, his breath shallow and ragged. He gripped a leather pouch so tightly his knuckles turned white, the weight of the gold inside pulling at his palm. He stepped toward the captain, who stood motionless, eyes locked on the darkening horizon. Jonah thrust the pouch forward. The captain took it, his calloused fingers closing over the coins without a single glance downward. The transaction was silent, absolute, and final. Jonah did not wait for an acknowledgement. He turned, his boots thudding against the damp wood, and moved toward the shadows of the hold. He kept his head low, avoiding the gaze of the crew who moved about the rigging. Every step away from the pier felt like a severance. The harbor lights began to blur as the ship pulled away, the distance between the man and the shore growing with every rotation of the hull. He reached the threshold of the dark hold, looked back one last time at the receding land, and stepped into the gloom. The pier shrank to a thin, jagged line against the horizon. The ship groaned as it hit the deeper swells, the wood shifting with a rhythmic, hollow thud that echoed through the hull. Jonah sat in the dark, listening to the water slap against the side. Above, the deck lights flickered, casting long, distorted shapes that stretched across the floor like reaching fingers. The air in the hold grew heavy, stagnant, and thick. He climbed back to the main deck, seeking a breath of wind, but the atmosphere had turned. The breeze had died, replaced by a sudden, sharp scent of ozone that stung his nostrils. It was the smell of a storm that had no business existing. The crew stopped their work, looking toward the open sea where the sky had begun to bruise into deep, unnatural shades. Jonah gripped the rail, his knuckles whitening once more, as the first true breath of the coming gale brushed against his face. The sky above the vessel fractured. Violet clouds, heavy and bloated, drifted into collision with massive banks of charcoal. Where they met, the light did not fade. It was devoured. The horizon vanished, consumed by a bruised, suffocating darkness. The sea responded to the atmospheric collapse with a sudden, violent agitation. The rhythmic swell of the ocean broke. White foam erupted from the black surface, spraying across the deck like shards of glass. The water grew heavy. Every wave that struck the hull hit with the force of a falling stone, sending tremors through the wood that rattled the teeth. The surface of the sea rose in jagged, unpredictable peaks, blocking out the last remnants of the day. The ship pitched sharply. The water was no longer a path. It was a trap. The ocean churned, boiling with a dark, relentless energy. Jonah watched the horizon disappear, his eyes fixed on the roiling wall of water. The storm had arrived, and the sea was hungry. A mountain of water slammed into the bow, burying the deck in a freezing torrent. The ship groaned, a deep, structural protest that vibrated through the very marrow of the vessel. High above, the main mast shrieked as the wind caught the rigging, the wood splintering with the sound of a gunshot. Sailors scrambled across the slick, tilting deck, their hands raw and bleeding as they fought to secure the thrashing ropes. The chaos was absolute, men shouted, but their voices were swallowed by the roar of the gale. Amidst this frantic scramble for survival, Jonah stood by the rail, unmoving. He did not reach for a rope. His face was a mask of silent resignation, eyes locked on the churning black expanse beyond the shattered bow. The ship tilted further, the deck slick with brine, as the final supports of the mast began to buckle. Jonah did not hesitate. He stepped over the rail, his weight shifting forward into the empty air. Gravity claimed him instantly. He plunged downward, his body slicing through the surface with a sharp, clean entry. The roar of the storm vanished, replaced by the muffled, rhythmic thrum of the deep ocean. The water was cold, a biting, absolute chill that seeped into his skin as he descended. Bubbles trailed him, silver streaks in the indigo-black water, before floating upward toward the distant, churning surface. He sank deeper, the light from the storm fading into a bruised, murky gray, then into total, suffocating blackness. The pressure mounted, pushing against his chest, forcing the air from his lungs in a single, desperate stream. He stopped struggling. He let the abyss take him. Just as the last of his momentum died, the darkness ahead shifted. A vast, circular shape emerged from the void, dwarfing everything around it. A massive eye opened, its surface glowing with a cold bioluminescent intensity. It stared directly at him, a sun of pale, pulsing light in the heart of the crushing pressure. The jaws snapped shut, a sound like a thunderclap muffled by miles of water. Jonah was swept forward in a torrent of brine, tumbling through a throat that felt like a tunnel of slick, shifting muscle. He hit a surface that gave way under his weight, sliding down a slope of cartilage and tangled kelp. He came to a halt in a vast, vaulted space that defied the laws of the sea. The walls were not stone, but living, translucent tissue, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic blue light that ebbed and flowed like a slow-beating heart. The air, if it could be called air, was thick and humid, smelling of salt and ancient depths. Around him lay the wreckage of a dozen ships, splintered masts and rusted anchors half buried in glowing, bioluminescent seaweed that clung to the floor like a carpet of fallen stars. Jonah pushed himself up, his hands sinking into the slick, warm surface beneath him. He looked up at the towering ribs that arched overhead, their curves disappearing into the shadows above. He was trapped in a cathedral of flesh and bone. He moved slowly, his boots crunching on fragments of wood and bone. Jonah opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He tried again, a low, gravelly sound that rippled through the stagnant air. He spoke of the harbor, of the flight, and of the weight he had carried across the sea. His voice was a tremor at first, barely audible. As he continued, the cadence of his speech steadied. He stopped fighting the silence and let the truth anchor him. The blue light that had bathed the chamber began to flicker. It wavered, losing its cold, clinical edge. A warmth bloomed from the center of his chest, spreading outward like ink in water. The walls responded. The rhythmic blue pulse slowed, then deepened, bleeding into a rich, incandescent gold. The light crawled up the arching ribs. Jonah watched as his own hands, pressed against the slick membrane, began to glow with the same radiant hue. The air grew thin. He stood, his shadow cast long and sharp against the golden walls, and waited for the beast to move. The floor beneath Jonah surged upward with a force that knocked him off his feet. The rhythmic hum of the beast accelerated into a roar of rushing water and shifting muscle. He braced himself against the arching ribs as the entire structure tilted, tilting the world into a steep vertical climb. Light poured in from above, blinding and absolute. The creature broke the surface with a thunderous explosion of foam and spray that shattered the silence of the sea. Jonah was propelled forward, sliding across the slick, receding membrane as the beast opened its jaws. He tumbled out, hitting the wet, packed sand with a jarring impact. He rolled, his hands digging into the grit, and pushed himself to his knees. The air hit his lungs like a physical blow, cold, dry, and sharp. He gasped, his chest heaving as he fought for breath. Above him, the horizon had erupted. The charcoal clouds were torn apart, replaced by a brilliant, triumphant display of pink and orange that bled across the sky. The surf hissed against the shore, pulling back to reveal the vast, empty expanse of the beach. Jonah stood, his legs shaking, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the light was strongest. The roar of the retreating tide faded into a rhythmic, steady pulse. Jonah stood motionless on the wet sand, his feet sinking slightly into the cooling grit. He wiped the salt from his eyes and turned his head. Far across the undulating dunes, shimmering in the heat haze of the morning, the gates of Nineveh rose like jagged teeth against the sky. They were massive, silent, and inevitable. He felt the weight of his own history pressing against his spine, a burden that had traveled with him from the harbor to the belly of the beast and finally to this shore. He took a breath, the air tasting of brine and dry earth. He shifted his weight, his muscles protesting the movement, and planted his right foot firmly into the sand. The first step was heavy, deliberate, and final. He began to walk, his shadow stretched out before him, a long, dark finger pointing toward the city walls. With every stride, the distance between him and his destiny narrowed. He did not look back at the sea. He did not look for the creature that had brought him here. His focus was singular, locked onto the stone threshold of the city that awaited his arrival. The sun climbed higher, intensifying the glare off the sand. But he did not falter. The path ahead was vast, empty, and daunting. He kept his pace steady, his rhythm unbroken, moving deeper into the landscape. The camera pulled back, rising steadily into the sky, shrinking the solitary figure until he was nothing more than a speck against the immense, shifting expanse of the desert, marching toward the silence of the gates.